The monitors screamed in the silence of the mansion's nursery. Barbara Moran's hands trembled as she adjusted the oxygen mask on baby Jessie's pale face, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd been a maid in the Ortiz household for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for this, a 6-month-old fighting for every breath while his mother's Louboutins clicked down the marble hallway, walking away. "I didn't sign up for a defective baby," Christine Ortiz had said just hours before, her designer luggage already packed. "I'm going to the Hamptons. Call me if this is over." Thomas Ortiz, the 40-year-old billionaire who owned half of Manhattan's skyline, stood frozen in his study, drowning in contracts he suddenly couldn't focus on. His empire demanded him. His son was dying. His wife was gone. And his maid was the only one who hadn't abandoned Jessie. Barbara pressed her lips to Jessie's fevered forehead, tears streaming down her face. She was just the help. She had no right to be here. But someone had to love this child. Someone had to stay. So she did. The first night alone with Jessie, Barbara stood in the doorway of the nursery for 10 full minutes, unable to move. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm heart rate, oxygen saturation, respiratory rate numbers she'd memorized from the folder the night nurse had left before Christine dismissed her with a curt, "We can't afford round-the-clock care anymore." They owned 3 homes. Thomas's watch cost more than Barbara's annual salary, but they couldn't afford a night nurse. Barbara understood what that really meant. Christine was gone, and no one was coming to help. She moved her few belongings from the 3rd-floor maid's quarters that night, setting up a makeshift bedroom in the small sitting room adjacent to the nursery. Her twin mattress fit awkwardly against the wall, her clothes folded in 2 suitcases because there was no closet. But she could hear Jessie breathe. She could reach him in seconds. That was all that mattered. The first week, she barely slept. Every beep from the monitors sent her heart racing. She kept the hospital discharge papers on her nightstand, reading them over and over until the medical terminology started making sense. Tetralogy of Fallot. Hypoplastic left ventricle. Words that meant Jessie's heart was broken in ways she couldn't see, fighting battles inside his tiny chest that she couldn't touch. She learned the medications: first digoxin at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., Lasix once daily, aspirin crushed into his formula. She set alarms on her phone, wrote everything in a spiral notebook with Jessie's name written carefully on the cover in her neat handwriting. Medication, time, dose, response. Then vital signs: heart rate, respiratory rate, oxygen levels checked with the pulse oximeter the hospital had sent home. She recorded the color of his lips, whether his fingernails looked blue, how many ounces of formula he took. At 2 a.m. on the 4th night, she sat at the small desk in the nursery with her laptop, the glow illuminating Jessie's sleeping face. She typed infant heart failure symptoms into the search bar and fell down a rabbit hole of medical journals, parent forums, YouTube videos from cardiac nurses. She learned what retractions meant, that pulling between his ribs when he breathed. She learned to check for edema in his ankles, swelling that meant fluid was building up. She learned that the gray cast to his skin meant his oxygen was dropping, that the rapid breathing meant his heart was working too hard. She learned, and she learned, and she learned, because no one else was going to teach her. No one else was there. By the 2nd week, her hands stopped shaking when she drew up the medications and the syringes. Jessie would watch her with those enormous brown eyes, and she'd talk to him the whole time, narrating every step. "Okay, sweet boy, this is your heart medicine. I know it tastes bad, but it's going to make you strong. Just a little bit. There we go. Good job, Jessie. Such a good job." The first time he grabbed her finger while she was feeding him, his impossibly small hand wrapping around her index finger with surprising strength, Barbara's vision blurred with tears. She sat frozen, afraid to move and break the spell. His eyes locked on hers, so trusting, so present. In that moment, something shifted in her chest, a feeling so overwhelming she had to remind herself to breathe. "I've got you," she whispered. "I promise, baby. I've got you." Thomas existed as a ghost in his own home. She'd hear his footsteps in the hall at odd hours, see fresh coffee in the pot at 5 a.m. when she came downstairs to warm Jessie's bottle. Sometimes she'd find him standing outside the nursery door at 3 or 4 in the morning, his hand raised as if to knock, then dropping to his side. He never came in, never asked how Jessie was doing, never acknowledged that his wife had abandoned them both. Barbara told herself it wasn't her place to judge. Grief looked different on everyone. Maybe Thomas's way of coping was to pretend that if he didn't look directly at the problem, it wouldn't be real. Maybe he was terrified that if he let himself love Jesse fully, he'd lose him. Maybe he was just a coward. She wrote that thought in her journal, then immediately crossed it out. It wasn't fair. She didn't know what he was feeling. She only knew what she was feeling, and that was becoming impossible to ignore. On the 15th night, she was reading a medical forum on her laptop, other parents of children with congenital heart defects sharing tips and experiences when Jesse's breathing changed. She knew it immediately, the way a mother knows. The thought stopped her cold. Mother. She wasn't his mother. She was the help. But she was already moving to his crib, already checking his color. His lips were dusky purple. The pulse oximeter showed 82 too low, dangerously low. His chest was retracting with each breath, his little body working too hard. Come on, baby, she murmured, adjusting his position, checking the oxygen line. Come on, Jesse, breathe for me. His oxygen climbed to 85, then 87. Still too low. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. And then his chest went still. The world stopped. Barbara's training, all those YouTube videos she'd watched at 3 a.m., all the infant CPR guides she'd studied kicked in with crystalline clarity. She lifted him from the crib, placed him on the changing table, tilted his head back slightly. 2 fingers on his sternum. 30 compressions, fast and shallow. 2 rescue breaths into his tiny mouth. Come on, Jesse. Come on, baby, breathe. Please breathe. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. She was crying, her hands steady even as her whole body shook. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. His chest rose. He gasped, choked, and then screamed the most beautiful sound Barbara had ever heard. She snatched him up, holding him against her chest, feeling his heart hammer against hers. Her hands found her phone, dialed 911, and she was talking, explaining, giving the address while Jesse cried, and she held him and thanked God and the universe and anyone listening. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. Thomas appeared in the hallway in a wrinkled dress shirt, his face gray, as the paramedics swept into the nursery. Barbara rode with them, Jesse clutched in her arms, the EMT checking his vitals while the siren wailed. Are you the mother? The EMT asked, adjusting the oxygen mask. Barbara opened her mouth. The truth would be, no, I'm the maid. His mother is in the Hamptons. His father is somewhere behind us, following in his car, maybe. I'm nobody. I'm nothing to this child, legally speaking. But her arms were around him. His fingers were twisted in her shirt. She could still feel his heart against hers, still feel that moment of nothing before the compressions brought him back. I'm his caregiver, she said finally. The EMT nodded, already moving on to the next question, but Barbara felt the weight of what she hadn't said. The truth that was growing in her heart, like something alive and undeniable. She loved this child as if he were her own. At the hospital, they stabilized Jesse, adjusted his medications, kept him for observation. Barbara sat in the chair beside his crib in the pediatric ICU, holding his hand through the bars. When Thomas finally arrived an hour later, she was documenting everything in her journal time of the incident, what she'd observed, what she'd done, what the doctors were saying. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. She looked up, met his eyes. He looked shattered. You saved his life, Thomas said quietly. I did what needed to be done. The doctors said if you'd waited even another minute, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. Barbara nodded, then turned back to Jesse. There was nothing else to say. She hadn't done it for thanks. She'd done it because she couldn't imagine a world where she didn't. 3 days later, they brought Jesse home. Thomas disappeared back into his study. Barbara settled into the nursery with her journal, her medications, her alarms. That evening, Christine called. The first time since she'd left. How's the situation? Christine's voice came through the phone speaker, bright and detached, like she was asking about a delayed package. Barbara stared at Jesse sleeping in his crib, at the pulse oximeter clipped to his toe, at the medications lined up on the dresser, at the child who'd stopped breathing in her arms, who she'd brought back to life with her own hands. He's stable, Barbara said, her voice neutral. Professional. The doctors adjusted his medications. He's tolerating them well. Good. That's good. And Thomas? Is he managing? Managing. As if any of this was manageable. As if this was just another problem to be handled efficiently. You should ask him yourself, Mrs. Ortiz. A pause. Right. Well, I'll check in again soon. Thank you for handling things. The call ended. Barbara stood there in the dim nursery, phone in hand, rage and sorrow warring in her chest. Handling things. That's what she was doing. Handling the life of a child whose mother couldn't be bothered to ask his name, to ask if he was in pain, to ask anything that mattered. That night, Barbara pulled the rocking chair closer to Jessie's crib. She'd been sleeping on the mattress in the sitting room, but something had shifted. She needed to be closer. She settled into the chair with a blanket, her journal in her lap, and watched the rise and fall of his chest. In the lamplight, his face was peaceful. Perfect. So worth fighting for. She wrote the date at the top of a new page. Day 18. Then she wrote, "Today Jessie stopped breathing. Today I brought him back. Today I became something I was never supposed to be. Today I crossed a line I can't uncross." She paused, pen hovering over the page. Then she finished, "I don't regret it. I never will." 2 hours later, Thomas found her there asleep in the rocking chair, her journal fallen open in her lap, Jessie sleeping peacefully in his crib beside her. He stood in the doorway for a long time, taking in the scene. The devoted woman who'd saved his son's life. The child who was somehow still alive because of her. The room that had become a place of love instead of fear. He didn't wake her. He just pulled the spare blanket from the closet and draped it gently over her shoulders. Barbara stirred slightly, her hand instinctively moving to check on Jessie, even in sleep, then settled again. Thomas stepped back into the hallway and closed the door quietly behind him. In his study, he picked up his phone, scrolled to Christine's contact, and stared at it for a long time. Then he set the phone down and returned to the nursery door, standing watch over the two people who were somehow holding his broken family together while he fell apart. Thomas started coming to the nursery on a Thursday evening in late March. Barbara was changing Jessie's diaper when she heard the door creak open. She glanced back, expecting the cleaning staff, and froze when she saw him standing there in shirt sleeves, his tie loosened, looking utterly lost. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." You're not interrupting." Barbara turned back to Jessie, fastening the diaper tabs with practiced efficiency. "He's your son." The words hung in the air. Thomas stepped further into the room, his eyes moving over the space that had transformed in the 2 months since Christine left. Medical supplies organized in clear bins. Charts taped to the wall, tracking Jessie's vitals. The rocking chair with Barbara's blanket draped over the arm. The small desk covered in medical journals and printed research articles. "May I?" Thomas gestured to Jessie. Barbara lifted him gently, settling him in her arms before extending him toward Thomas. For a moment, she saw panic flash across his face, the fear of a man who'd avoided holding his own son because acknowledging him meant acknowledging everything else. But he took Jessie carefully, cradling him against his chest with an awkwardness that made Barbara's throat tight. Jessie fussed, his face scrunching up, and Thomas looked at Barbara helplessly. "Support his head more," she said softly, "and maybe walk a little. He likes movement." Thomas adjusted his hold and began pacing slowly across the nursery. Jessie's crying softened to whimpers, then stopped altogether. They stood in silence, just the sound of the monitors and Thomas's footsteps on the carpet. "When did you learn to do all this?" Thomas asked finally, his voice rough. He gestured with his chin toward the medication schedule on the wall, the detailed charts, the medical equipment Barbara operated like she'd been born to it. Barbara considered lying, softening the truth. Then she remembered that she'd crossed too many lines already to bother with politeness now. "When someone had to," she said simply. Thomas stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw him taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the weight she'd lost, the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She was 29, but looked older now, worn down by sleepless nights and constant vigilance. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Barbara. This isn't your responsibility. This was never supposed to be, but it is." She cut him off, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "It is my responsibility because I chose it. Because someone had to choose him." The unspoken accusation hung between them. "You didn't." Neither did she. Thomas sank into the rocking chair, still holding Jessie. "Teach me," he said. "Please. Teach me how to take care of my son." So she did. That evening, and the next, and the one after that. Barbara showed him how to prepare the medications, how to check Jessie's oxygen saturation, how to read the signs of distress in his breathing and color. Thomas was clumsy at first, measuring doses with shaking hands. But he kept coming back. Every evening at 6, he'd appear in the nursery doorway, ready to learn. They developed a routine. Thomas would arrive as Barbara was preparing Jesse's evening medication. She'd talk him through each step while he performed it, her voice calm and instructional. Then they'd sit together, Thomas in the rocking chair, Barbara on the floor with her back against the wall, while Jesse dozed between them. It was during one of these quiet evenings that they had their first real conversation. "Christine called today," Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. She wanted to know if Jesse was still he couldn't finish the sentence. "Still alive," Barbara finished for him. "That's what she asked me last week. Not how is he doing. Not is he in pain. Just checking if the situation had resolved itself yet." Thomas flinched. She wasn't always like this. When we first met, he stopped, laughed bitterly. "Actually, maybe she was always like this. Maybe I just didn't want to see it. What matters now is what we do for Jessie," Barbara said. "Not what she is or isn't." "We," Thomas repeated softly. "You keep saying we." Like he looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "Like we're a team. Like you're not just the help." Barbara held his gaze. "I stopped being just the help the night she walked out. I became whatever Jessie needed me to be." "And what do you need, Barbara?" The question caught her off guard. In 2 months, no one had asked her that. "I need him to live," she said finally. "I need to know that every night I spend sleeping 3 feet from his crib, every YouTube video I watch at 2 a.m., every time my hands shake while I'm measuring out his medications, I need it to mean something. I need him to survive." Thomas nodded slowly. Jessie stirred in the crib between them, making soft baby sounds. They both turned to watch him, and Barbara felt the shift happening, the boundaries that had defined their relationship dissolving into something she couldn't name yet. The investigators' report arrived on a Tuesday morning in mid-April. Thomas's assistant brought it to the nursery, where Barbara was attempting to get Jesse to take his bottle. Thomas opened the manila envelope while she worked, his face growing progressively paler as he read. "What is it?" Barbara asked, glancing up. Thomas didn't answer. He just kept reading, page after page, his jaw tightening. Finally, he looked up, and the expression on his face was something beyond anger. It was a cold, crystalline fury that made him look like a stranger. "She's been having an affair," he said flatly, "for over a year, with a French art dealer named Philippe Moreau. The investigator has photos, emails, financial records." He flipped through the pages. The timeline. "Jesus. The timeline shows she got pregnant right before she was planning to leave me. Jessie was supposed to be her insurance policy, a security baby to guarantee she'd get a massive settlement." Barbara's hands stilled on the bottle. "What? She got pregnant deliberately. There are emails between her and Philippe discussing it. She was going to divorce me, take half of everything, and Jessie was supposed to be her leverage." Thomas's voice was shaking now. But then the prenatal screening showed his heart condition. And suddenly her perfect plan was ruined because she'd be stuck with a sick child who needed round-the-clock care, who might not even his voice broke, who might not even survive. Barbara set the bottle down carefully. She felt something dark and furious rising in her chest, something she had to control before it consumed her. She never wanted him. She wanted what he could get her. And when he became inconvenient, she walked away. Thomas stood abruptly, pacing across the room. "She left him to die, Barbara. She left knowing he could die at any moment, and she just walked away." "But he didn't die," Barbara said quietly. "He's here. He's fighting. And we're fighting for him." Thomas stopped, turned to look at her. "You're fighting for him. I've been hiding in my study pretending none of this is real. You're here now. It's not enough. It's nowhere near enough." Barbara picked up Jesse, holding him against her shoulder, his small hand fisted in her shirt, his breathing steady against her neck. "Then make it enough. You can't change what she did. You can only change what you do now." That evening, Christine called. Thomas answered on speakerphone, Barbara present at his insistence. Christine's face filled the screen. She was on a video call, clearly on a yacht somewhere tropical. The ocean sparkled behind her. A man's arm was visible at the edge of the frame, a champagne flute in his hand. "Thomas, darling," Christine said brightly. "How are things?" "How is Jesse?" Thomas corrected, his voice tight. Christine's smile flickered. "Of course. How is Jesse? He had a good day today. His oxygen saturation was steady all afternoon. We're adjusting his Lasix dose next week." Christine's eyes narrowed. "You mean the maid is still Barbara?" Thomas interrupted. Her name is Barbara. And yes, she's still caring for our son. Since you're not here to do it, don't start, Thomas. You know I needed space. This has been incredibly difficult for you. Thomas's control snapped. Our son almost died last month. He stopped breathing in Barbara's arms, and she brought him back to life with CPR. Where were you? Oh, right. According to the photos my investigator sent me, you were in St. Tropez with Philippe. The color drained from Christine's face. Behind her, the man's arm retreated out of frame. So we're spying on each other now. Christine recovered quickly, her voice hardening. How mature, Thomas. Was Jesse ever anything more than a pawn to you? Thomas leaned forward. Did you ever want him at all? Silence stretched between them. Barbara held her breath, watching Christine's face cycle through calculations. Then something shifted. Christine's mask fell away, and what remained was almost refreshing in its honesty. I never wanted a sick child, she said flatly. I want a life, Thomas. A real life. Not playing nurse to a baby who might not even survive. Not being trapped in that mausoleum you call a home. Watching monitors beep, counting medications. That's not what I signed up for. What did you sign up for? Barbara heard herself ask. Christine's eyes flicked to her, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time. The billionaire's wife. The penthouse. The galas. The perfect life. Not she gestured vaguely at the phone, at everything they represented. Not this. Not a defective baby and a husband who works 18-hour days and a life that's just small and sad and exhausting. He's your son, Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. He's your son, Christine corrected. I did my part. I carried him. I gave birth. But I'm not going to sacrifice my entire existence for a child who might not make it past his first birthday. I deserve more than that. Barbara felt Thomas's hand on her shoulder, whether to steady himself or her. She wasn't sure. Jesse stirred in her arms, making small sounds, blissfully unaware that his mother had just disowned him on camera. Then don't come back, Thomas said. Don't call. Don't pretend you care about the situation. Jesse deserves better than a mother who sees him as inconvenient. Finally, Christine said, something like relief in her voice. Finally, you're being honest. File for divorce, Thomas. Philippe and I are engaged. We'll handle this civilly, divide everything fairly, and move on with our lives. Civilly, Thomas repeated, incredulous. Adults can do that, you know. Not everyone has to make everything so dramatic. Christine's eyes moved past him to Barbara. Make sure she documents everything properly. I'll want records of his medical care when the lawyers start dividing assets. The call ended. Thomas stood frozen, staring at the blank screen. Barbara waited, Jesse drowsy in her arms, for him to explode or collapse or something. Instead, he turned to her with an expression of such devastation that she felt it in her own chest. She's right about one thing, he said hoarsely. Jesse deserves better. He deserves better than both of us. He deserves you. Before Barbara could respond, Jesse made a sound she'd never heard before, a small coo of pleasure. She looked down and her heart stopped. He was smiling. A real smile, not gas or random muscle movement, but a genuine, focused smile directed right at her face. Thomas, she whispered. Look. Thomas moved closer. They both stared at Jesse, who smiled wider, his whole face lighting up. It was the first smile, the first real sign that he was more than just a sick baby fighting to survive. He was a person, present and engaged, capable of joy. Barbara felt tears streaming down her face. Thomas made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. And Jesse just kept smiling, his eyes locked on Barbara's face. This woman who'd chosen to love him when no one else would. She's wrong, Thomas said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Christine is wrong about everything. This he gestured at Jesse, at the smile, at the monitors and medications, and all of it. This isn't small or sad. This is everything. Barbara nodded, unable to speak, holding Jesse close. His small hand gripped her finger, his smile finally fading into sleepy contentment. That night, after Thomas left and Jesse slept peacefully in his crib, Barbara opened her journal. She recorded the day's vitals, the medication times, Jesse's food intake. Then, at the bottom of the page, she wrote, Today Jesse smiled. Today his mother said she never wanted him. Today his father finally saw him. Today everything changed. She closed the journal and sat in the darkness, listening to Jesse breathe, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new battles. But tonight, they had a smile. They had this small, perfect moment. And it was enough. It had to be enough. Christine arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, her heels clicking across the marble foyer like gunshots. Barbara was in the kitchen preparing Jesse's afternoon medication when she heard the front door open without a knock, without warning. She looked up to see Christine standing in the doorway, perfectly coiffed in a cream Chanel suit, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair. "Where's Thomas?" Christine asked, not bothering with hello. "At the office. He has meetings until 6. Barbara kept her voice steady, her hands continuing to measure out Jesse's digoxin. "Did you need something, Mrs. Ortiz? I need to discuss the divorce settlement. Tell Thomas I'll be at the plaza. He can meet me there at 7. Christine's eyes swept over the kitchen, taking in the medical supplies organized on the counter, the medication schedule taped to the wall. "How's the baby?" "Jesse," Barbara corrected quietly. "His name is Jesse, and he's stable." "Right. Jesse." Christine said it like she was testing out an unfamiliar word. "That's good. That'll make the custody arrangement cleaner." Barbara's hands stilled on the syringe. "Custody arrangement. My lawyers advised that I should maintain partial custody. Looks better, apparently, and gives me more leverage in the settlement negotiations." Christine examined her manicured nails. "Don't worry, I'm not planning to actually take him. I'll sign over primary custody to Thomas immediately after the divorce is finalized. Everyone gets what they want." "What about what Jesse wants?" Barbara heard herself say. Christine's eyes snapped to her, sharp and cold. "I'm sorry, I don't recall asking for your opinion. You're the help, not family. Remember your place." Barbara thought about the nights she'd held Jesse while he struggled to breathe. The time she'd brought him back from the edge. The smile he saved just for her. Her place. Her place was wherever Jesse needed her to be. "Of course, Mrs. Ortiz," Barbara said, her voice empty of inflection. Christine left in a cloud of expensive perfume. Barbara stood in the kitchen, Jesse's medication growing warm in her trembling hands, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. That evening, Thomas left for an emergency board meeting at 5. A key investor was threatening to pull out of a major development deal. It required his immediate attention, his physical presence. Barbara saw the conflict in his face as he stood in the nursery doorway, briefcase in hand. "I'll be back by 9, he said. "Call me if anything changes." "We'll be fine," Barbara assured him, even as something whispered that tonight felt different. Wrong somehow. Jesse was fussy through dinner, refusing his bottle, his skin taking on that grayish cast that Barbara had learned to dread. His oxygen saturation hovered at 88, not critical, but not good. She increased the oxygen flow, held him, sang softly, checked and rechecked his vitals. At 7:47 p.m., everything fell apart. Jesse's breathing changed first, that rapid, shallow pattern that meant his heart was working too hard. Barbara grabbed the pulse oximeter. 82, too low. She adjusted his position, checked the oxygen line. 80. His lips were turning blue. "Come on, baby," she murmured, her voice calm even as panic clawed at her throat. "Stay with me. Just stay with me." His eyes rolled back. His chest stopped moving. "No, no, no, no." Barbara's hands moved on instinct. Jesse on the changing table, head tilted, fingers on his sternum. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Her phone was on speaker, 911 operator's voice filling the room. "I need an ambulance. My baby's not breathing. 6 months old, congenital heart defect." "Ma'am, are you performing CPR?" "Yes." 30 compressions, 2 breaths. "He's still not," Jesse gasped, choked, his chest rising. "He's breathing. He's breathing, but barely. Please hurry." The ambulance arrived in 5 minutes. Barbara rode with Jesse, his hand clutched in hers, the paramedics working around her with controlled urgency. She was praying. She hadn't prayed since childhood, but the words poured out of her in a desperate stream. "Please, please don't take him. I'll do anything. Give him my years. Take anything from me, but let him live. Please." The hospital was chaos. Doctors and nurses descended the moment they arrived. Barbara ran alongside the gurney, still holding Jesse's hand, until a nurse gently but firmly separated them. "You need to wait here, Mom." "Mom." Barbara didn't correct her. She stood in the hallway, her hands still shaking, Jesse's blood on her shirt from where they'd inserted the 4. A doctor approached her 20 minutes later, his face grave. "Ms. Ortiz." "Moran." "Barbara Moran." Her voice came from somewhere far away. I'm his caregiver. The doctor's expression shifted slightly. Is a parent present? His father's at a meeting. His mother, she's not available. What's happening? Is he? Jesse's heart is failing. We need to perform emergency surgery to repair the defective valves. Without it, he won't survive the night. But we need parental consent. The doctor held out a clipboard. Can you reach his parents? Barbara pulled out her phone with numb fingers. Thomas's phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He always silenced it during board meetings. She tried again. Voicemail. She called his office. His assistant said the meeting was in a secure conference room. No interruptions allowed except for extreme emergencies. This is an extreme emergency, Barbara said, her voice breaking. I'll try to get a message through. Give me 10 minutes. Barbara didn't have 10 minutes. She called Christine. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. Sent a text. Jesse needs emergency surgery. Call immediately. The doctor was watching her with growing concern. Ms. Moran, we need to move now. Every minute we wait, I can't reach them. Barbara stared at the consent forms in her hands. Pages of legal language that meant she was about to do something that could destroy her, that could land her in legal trouble, that could cost her everything. I'm not his mother. I'm not legally, I don't have the right. What you have, the doctor said quietly, is a child who will die without this surgery. In situations like this, when a parent cannot be reached and delay would result in death, medical professionals are authorized to act in the child's best interest. But we need someone who knows this child, who can advocate for him, to make this decision. Barbara looked through the window into the trauma bay. Jesse was so small on that gurney, surrounded by machines and monitors, and people fighting to keep him alive. She thought about the night Christine had walked out, the mornings she'd woken up to Jesse's smile, the thousand small moments when he'd grabbed her finger, when he'd quieted at her voice, when he'd looked at her with complete trust. She thought about crossing lines and staying in her place and what it meant to love someone more than you loved your own safety. Where do I sign? She asked. Her hand was steady as she signed her name, Barbara Jean Moran, on line after line. The doctor took the clipboard, squeezed her shoulder once, and disappeared through the doors. A nurse led Barbara to a small waiting room with harsh fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs. She sat down and started shaking. Full body tremors that she couldn't control. She'd just authorized surgery on a child who wasn't hers. She'd lied by omission, let them believe she had the authority to make this decision. What if Thomas was furious? What if she'd overstepped so catastrophically that she lost everything, her job, her home, any chance of staying in Jesse's life? What if Jesse died and it was her fault for making the wrong choice? She pulled out her phone and called Thomas again, and again, and again. At 9:23 p.m., he called back. Barbara barely got 2 words out before she was sobbing, explaining about Jesse's collapse, the ambulance, the surgery, the form she'd signed. Thomas's voice went from confused to terrified to something she couldn't identify. I'm leaving now. Don't move. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He made it in 12. Barbara heard him before she saw him running footsteps in the hospital corridor, his voice demanding to know where his son was. Then he was in the doorway of the waiting room, his tie gone, his shirt rumpled, his face the color of ash. Where is he? In surgery. They started 40 minutes ago. They said. Barbara's voice broke. They said it would take 2 hours. Thomas sank into the chair beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas said, very quietly, you saved his life. Again. I don't know. What if I made the wrong choice? What if the surgery you made the only choice? Thomas turned to look at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, devastated. I wasn't there. I was sitting in a boardroom discussing profit margins while my son was dying. Christine didn't even answer her phone. You were the only one who was there. The only one who's always there. I signed legal documents I had no right to sign. Thomas, I could be in serious trouble. They thought I was the doctor called me mom, and I didn't correct him. I let them believe good. Thomas interrupted. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you didn't let legal technicalities kill my son. They sat in silence. Around them, the hospital moved in its late-night rhythm, soft beeps, distant conversations, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Barbara's phone buzzed. A text from Christine. Saw your message. Hope everything works out. At dinner, can't talk. Hope everything works out. Her son was having open-heart surgery, and she hoped it worked out, like it was a minor inconvenience. Barbara showed Thomas the text. She watched something fundamental shift in his expression, the last vestiges of whatever he'd felt for Christine burning away, leaving only cold clarity. "I'm done," he said. "With her. With pretending any of this is normal. With putting my company before my family." He looked at Barbara. "Jesse's going to survive this surgery. And when he does, I'm going to make sure Christine never has a claim on him again. Partial custody for leverage," he spat the words like poison. "Over my dead body." At 11:47 p.m., the surgeon emerged. Barbara and Thomas stood simultaneously, two people braced for devastation. "The surgery went well," the doctor said, and Barbara's knees nearly buckled. "We were able to repair both valves. He's in ICU now, stable but critical. You can see him, but only one visitor at a time." "You go," Thomas said immediately to Barbara. "Thomas, he's your son, and you're his mother." Thomas said it firmly, clearly, like stating a fact as obvious as gravity. "You're the only mother he's ever had. Go see him. I'll wait." Barbara walked through those doors on shaking legs. The ICU was dimly lit, full of machines and monitors, and the soft sounds of mechanical breathing. Jesse was in an incubator, tubes and wires covering his tiny body, but his chest was rising and falling. He was alive. Barbara sank into the chair beside him, reached through the incubator openings to hold his hands, so small, so fragile, but warm. Alive. She sat there crying silently, tears streaming down her face, gripping his hand like she could anchor him to this world through sheer force of will. When Thomas came in 30 minutes later, that's how he found her holding Jesse's hand, tears tracking down her cheeks, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or promises or both. He sat in the chair beside her. They stayed like that through the night, taking turns holding Jesse's hand, neither of them willing to leave. At some point, Barbara whispered, "I signed the forms. I'm sorry. I couldn't let him die." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Don't apologize. You saved his life." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of something Barbara couldn't name. "You're his mother, Barbara. You're the only mother he's ever had, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it." Barbara wanted to argue, to remind him of all the reasons why that wasn't true: biology, legality, the thousand barriers that separated what she was from what she wanted to be. But Jesse's hand was in hers. His heart was beating, and Thomas was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been too afraid to ask. So instead, she just nodded and turned back to Jesse, holding on, refusing to let go. Whatever came next, legal battles, custody fights, crossing lines she could never uncross, she'd face it. For him, she'd face anything. She already had. The courthouse steps were a gauntlet of camera flashes and shouted questions. Barbara kept her head down, Thomas's hand firm on her elbow as they pushed through the crowd. The headlines had been brutal for the first 2 weeks. Maid claims billionaire's baby, gold digger plays mother, employee oversteps in custody battle. Christine's team had gotten ahead of the narrative, painting her as the sympathetic figure, the beautiful wife driven away by the unbearable stress of a dying child, now fighting to maintain a connection to her son. Barbara had barely slept in 3 days. She kept rehearsing what she'd say on the stand, then forgetting it all, panic rising in her throat. What if they made her look like exactly what Christine's lawyers claimed, an opportunistic employee who'd exploited a family's tragedy? In the small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, Thomas's lead attorney, Rachel Chun, reviewed her testimony one more time. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd made her career defending the defenseless. "They're going to try to rattle you," Rachel said. "They'll question your motives, your character, your right to even be in this courtroom. Don't let them. Just tell the truth." "What if the truth isn't enough?" Barbara's voice shook. "What if the judge decides that biology matters more than love?" Thomas interrupted. He'd been standing by the window, silent until now. He crossed to Barbara, took both her hands in his. "Then we appeal. And we keep appealing until we find a judge who understands what a mother really is." Barbara looked at their joined hands. 6 months ago, she'd been afraid to even make eye contact with him. Now he was risking his reputation, his business relationships, his standing in society, to fight for her right to be in Jesse's life. The thought made her throat tight. "What if I cost you everything?" she whispered. "You already gave me everything," Thomas said simply. "You gave me my son. Let me do this." The courtroom was packed. Barbara sat at the defendant's table, though she wasn't technically the defendant. It felt like she was. Christine sat across the aisle in a dove-gray suit that probably cost more than Barbara's entire wardrobe, her expression carefully composed into tragic dignity. She'd lost weight, played up the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a woman suffering. Christine's lawyer, Martin Whitmore, was everything his retainer fee suggested: polished, aggressive, and utterly without mercy. His opening statement painted a picture of a devoted mother driven to the breaking point by her child's illness, a woman who'd needed space to heal, only to return and find her employee had usurped her role. Barbara Moran, Whitmore said, his voice dripping with disdain, is not Jesse Ortiz's mother. She is his father's employee. Yet she has systematically inserted herself into a maternal role, even going so far as to illegally sign medical consent forms, an action that could have resulted in criminal charges had Mr. Ortiz not intervened. Barbara felt every eye in the courtroom on her. She forced herself to keep her spine straight, her expression neutral, even as shame burned through her. Rachel's opening was quieter, but no less powerful. She presented Barbara's journal, 8 months of meticulous documentation. Every medication dose, every vital sign, every crisis, and every small victory. She played security footage from the night Christine left, Christine in her cocktail dress and heels, pulling a suitcase, walking past the nursery without looking back. Barbara rushing to Jesse's crib as his monitors alarmed, lifting him, holding him close. Barbara Moran, Rachel said, became Jesse Ortiz's mother the night his biological mother abandoned him. Not because she wanted power or money or position, but because a child was dying and someone had to love him. The first 3 days of testimony established the facts. Doctors testified about Jesse's condition, the severity of his heart defect, the precariousness of his early months. Thomas's investigator presented evidence of Christine's affair, the timeline of her pregnancy, the emails discussing Jesse as a security investment. The media began to shift, articles questioning Christine's motives, opinion pieces about what constitutes real motherhood. On the 4th day, Barbara took the stand. Whitmore circled her like a predator. Ms. Moran, you were employed as a maid in the Ortiz household, correct? Yes. Your duties included cleaning, laundry, basic household management. Yes. And yet, somehow, you decided these duties extended to playing mother to your employer's child. Whitmore's tone was mocking. When did you decide you had the right to overstep your position so dramatically? Barbara's hands clenched in her lap. She felt Thomas's presence behind her, Rachel's steadying gaze. Just tell the truth. I didn't decide I had the right, Barbara said quietly. The night Mrs. Ortiz left, Jesse was in respiratory distress. The night nurse had been dismissed. Mr. Ortiz was in his study. Jesse was alone, and he was dying. Someone had to be there. So I was there. How convenient for you, Whitmore said. With Mrs. Ortiz gone and Mr. Ortiz distracted, you saw an opportunity. One saw a baby who needed help. Barbara's voice was stronger now. I saw a child fighting for his life with no one to fight for him. So you appointed yourself his savior. His mother, Whitmore's voice dripped with sarcasm. You're just the maid, Ms. Moran. What made you think you had the right to play mother? The courtroom went silent. Barbara felt 8 months of exhaustion, fear, love, and determination rising in her chest. She looked directly at Whitmore, then at the judge, then at Christine's cold, beautiful face. I didn't think I had the right, Barbara said, her voice clear and steady. I just knew I had the ability to love him when no one else would. And I couldn't. Her voice broke, but she pushed through. I couldn't let him die alone and unloved because I was afraid of overstepping my place. My place is with him. It always has been. Silence. Then someone in the gallery started clapping. The judge gavelled for order, but Barbara saw his expression, something shifting from skepticism to consideration. Rachel's redirect was brief. Ms. Moran, do you love Jesse Ortiz? More than my own life. If you were to lose this case, if you were to never see him again, what would that cost you? Barbara's vision blurred with tears. Everything. It would cost me everything. When Rachel presented Barbara's journal to the judge, he spent 20 minutes reading it. The courtroom waited in tense silence as he turned page after page, Barbara's careful handwriting documenting every moment of Jesse's care. Medication schedules, vital signs, notes about his responses, his progress, his setbacks. Small observations. Jesse smiled today. Jesse grabbed my finger during his feeding. Jesse's oxygen stayed above 90 all day. Progress. The judge looked up, his expression no longer skeptical. This is remarkable documentation, Ms. Moran. In my 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen this level of medical care and attention. I wanted to make sure I was doing everything right, Barbara said. I needed him to survive. Christine took the stand on the 6th day. Whitmore tried to guide her through a sympathetic narrative, the overwhelmed mother, the impossible situation, the need for self-preservation. But Rachel's cross-examination stripped away the performance. Mrs. Ortiz, when did you last see your son in person? It's been several months. 6 months. You haven't seen Jesse in 6 months, is that correct? I needed space to heal. To heal from what, exactly? Your son's illness or your affair with Philippe Moreau? Whitmore objected. The judge overruled. Christine's composure cracked. My personal life is irrelevant. Is it? Rachel approached the stand. Your personal life led you to conceive Jesse as what you called a security investment. Your personal life led you to abandon him when he became inconvenient. Your personal life seems very relevant to whether you're fit to be his mother. I didn't abandon him. I left him in capable hands. In your maid's hands. Yes. Christine's mask was slipping now, irritation bleeding through. Barbara was perfectly capable of handling the situation. The situation, Rachel repeated. You mean your son? Your sick child, who almost died multiple times. Yes, fine, my son. Jesse, who might not even. Christine stopped herself, but it was too late. Who might not even what, Mrs. Ortiz? Christine's face hardened. Who might not even survive. That's the reality no one wants to say out loud. Jesse has a severe heart condition. The doctors gave him a 30% chance of making it to his first birthday. I couldn't watch him die. I couldn't spend months or years pouring everything into a child who might not make it. That might make me a terrible person in everyone's eyes, but at least I'm honest about it. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. Barbara sat frozen, feeling like she'd been physically struck. Beside her, Thomas had gone pale with rage. Rachel's voice cut through the noise. So you believe Jesse is not worth fighting for because he might die? I believe, Christine said coldly, that I have the right to choose how I spend my life. Jesse was born imperfect. That's not my fault. I didn't sign up to be a full-time nurse to a dying child. But Barbara Moran did. Barbara Moran is the help, Christine snapped. She gets paid to be there. It's her job. Ms. Moran gets paid $22 an hour to clean your house, Rachel said. No amount of money could pay someone to do what she's done. To sacrifice sleep, health, and her own life to care for a child who isn't hers. That's not a job, Mrs. Ortiz. That's love. The media narrative shifted overnight. Headlines screamed, Mother admits she abandoned sick son, billionaire's wife, baby not worth fighting for. Real mother was there all along. Barbara's face was plastered across every news site, no longer as the scheming maid, but as the devoted caregiver who'd stepped up when a biological mother walked away. On the 8th day, Jesse was brought to the courthouse for a brief observation. At 9 months old, he was doing better, his surgery successful, his color healthy, his eyes bright. A court-appointed child psychologist had requested to see his interactions with both women. Christine approached him first, arms extended. Jesse, darling, come to mommy. Jesse stared at her like she was a stranger. When she tried to pick him up, he turned his face away and started to cry. Barbara, sitting 10 feet away, instinctively started to rise. The psychologist nodded permission. Barbara crossed to Jesse, and his crying stopped immediately. He reached for her, his whole body straining toward her. When she picked him up, he buried his face in her neck, his small hands fisting in her shirt. Mama, Jesse said clearly. His first real word, spoken in a silent courtroom, witnessed by a judge and 50 observers. Barbara's knees buckled. Thomas was there instantly, his arm around her waist, holding her up. Jesse between them, calling her mama. The judge removed his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his expression was troubled but resolved. I'm calling a recess, he said. I need to review the evidence and consider my ruling. This case presents questions that go far beyond custody. It asks us to define what makes a mother, what makes a family, and whether love can transcend the boundaries of biology and law. That night, in Thomas's penthouse with Jesse sleeping peacefully in the next room, Barbara finally broke. She sat on the couch, Thomas beside her, and sobbed, huge, racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. What if it's not enough? She gasped between tears. What if he rules that biology matters more? What if I lose him? Thomas pulled her against him, let her cry into his shoulder. You won't lose him. I won't let that happen. Whatever the judge rules, whatever it takes, you and Jessie are family now. My family. And I protect my family. Barbara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love and devotion and 8 months of sacrifice mattered more than DNA and legal precedent. But she'd spent her whole life learning that the world didn't work that way, that people like her didn't get fairy tale endings. All she could do was wait for the judge's ruling and pray that, for once, love would be enough. The judge took 3 weeks to deliver his ruling. 3 weeks during which Barbara existed in a state of suspended terror, unable to eat properly, sleeping in fits and starts, checking on Jessie obsessively, as if he might vanish if she looked away too long. Thomas had moved her and Jessie into the penthouse. No more maid's quarters, no more pretense of employer and employee. They were in this together now, whatever came next. On a gray October morning, they returned to the courtroom. Barbara wore a navy dress that Thomas had insisted on buying her, though she'd protested. You need to look like Jessie's mother, he'd said firmly, not like the help. The gallery was packed again, cameras outside, the case having become a national conversation about motherhood, class, and what made a family real. Barbara sat with her hands clenched in her lap, Rachel on one side, Thomas on the other. Across the aisle, Christine looked bored, checking her phone until the bailiff called for everyone to rise. Judge Morrison entered, his expression grave and unreadable. He was a black man in his 60s who'd built his career on thoughtful, precedent-setting rulings. Barbara had Googled him obsessively. He had 3 daughters, had lost his wife to cancer, had a reputation for both fairness and rigidity when it came to the law. This case, Judge Morrison began, settling into his chair, has required me to wrestle with fundamental questions about parenthood, duty, and love. The law is clear about biological parental rights, but the law must also serve justice, and justice requires us to see the truth before us, not merely the facts. Barbara couldn't breathe. Thomas's hand found hers under the table, squeezed tight. The facts are these: Christine Ortiz gave birth to Jessie Ortiz. She is his biological mother. Under normal circumstances, her parental rights would be presumed and protected. Judge Morrison paused, looking directly at Christine. But these are not normal circumstances. Mrs. Ortiz abandoned her critically ill infant son, did not inquire about his welfare for months, admitted under oath that she viewed him as defective and not worth her time, and returned only when financial considerations made partial custody advantageous. Christine's lawyer started to object. The judge held up his hand. In contrast, Barbara Moran, an employee with no legal obligation to this child, became his primary caregiver, learned complex medical procedures, documented every aspect of his care with extraordinary diligence, and saved his life on multiple occasions. She signed emergency medical consent forms that, while technically unauthorized, were made in good faith to preserve the life of a child in imminent danger. Barbara's vision blurred. She felt Thomas's hand tighten around hers. The question before this court is not merely who has legal rights, but who has earned them through action, sacrifice, and love. Biology creates potential for family, but real family, is created through presence, devotion, and the daily choice to show up when it would be easier to walk away. Judge Morrison removed his glasses, set them on the bench. Therefore, I am issuing the following ruling: Thomas Ortiz is granted full legal and physical custody of Jessie Ortiz. Christine Ortiz's parental rights are hereby terminated based on voluntary abandonment and unfitness. She is barred from contact with the minor child until he reaches the age of 18, at which point Jessie may choose whether to have a relationship with her. Christine's face went white. Her lawyer was speaking urgently in her ear, but she just stared straight ahead, shock finally breaking through her composure. Furthermore, the judge continued, and now he was looking directly at Barbara. I am legally recognizing Barbara Jean Moran as Jessie Ortiz's primary caregiver, with full authority to make medical, educational, and daily life decisions. While I cannot grant her parental rights through this custody proceeding, I strongly encourage Mr. Ortiz to pursue legal avenues such as co-guardianship or adoption to formalize Ms. Moran's role in Jessie's life. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted. Barbara sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She'd won. She'd won. Jessie was hers not in the way biology made him Christine's, but in every way that mattered. Rachel was hugging her, saying something about history and precedent. Thomas had his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes wet. And Barbara just sat there, overwhelmed, until Jessie, who'd been with a social worker in the back, was brought to her. She took him in her arms, buried her face in his soft hair, and finally let herself believe it was real. 3 weeks later, Barbara sat at the pediatric cardiologist's office with a stack of forms. The receptionist slid them across the desk. Sign here, here, and here. You're listed as legal guardian. Yes, Barbara said, and signed her name with steady hands. Barbara J. Moran, guardian. No more explaining, no more justifying. Just her name, her authority, her right to be there. The transformation happened gradually after that. Thomas hired designers to renovate the nursery into a proper bedroom for Jessie. Barbara's belongings moved from the temporary setup to the master suite's adjoining room, her own space, but connected to the family. The staff dynamic shifted. She was no longer one of them, but not quite the lady of the house either. Something in between. Something new. It was on a December evening, snow falling outside the penthouse windows, Jessie asleep in his room, that Thomas found Barbara in the kitchen making tea. She'd been doing that lately, making tea at odd hours, standing at the window, still half expecting someone to tell her this was all a mistake. Have dinner with me, Thomas said. Barbara turned, raising an eyebrow. We have dinner together every night. Not like that. Like he ran a hand through his hair, suddenly awkward in a way she'd never seen him. Like a date. A real date. Just us. Barbara's heart stuttered. Thomas the first, no, the timing is complicated. I know we're still figuring out what this is, what we are to each other. But Barbara, he stepped closer. You're not just Jessie's mother. You're not just the woman who saved him. You're the person I want to talk to at the end of every day. You're the person who makes this house feel like home. And I'd like to take you to dinner and see if maybe we can be more than just Jessie's parents. Barbara stared at him. 6 months ago, she'd been his maid. A year ago, she'd been invisible to him. And now he was asking her on a date, looking at her like she was someone worth choosing, not just for Jessie but for himself. Okay, she whispered. Yes, I'd like that. Their first kiss happened 2 weeks later, in the penthouse living room after Jessie's bedtime, gentle and tentative and full of promise. Their relationship grew slowly, carefully, both of them aware they were building something that had to be solid for Jessie's sake. But it was real. Thomas seeing Barbara not as the help who'd risen above her station, but as an extraordinary woman he was lucky to love. Barbara learning to believe she deserved this, deserved him, deserved the life they were creating. Jessie said mama for the first time officially at his second birthday party, not the single word in the courtroom, but a clear, repeated mama mama while reaching for Barbara. She cried. She still cried every time he said it. Now, 3 years after the courtroom ruling, Barbara stood on the patio of the mansion's garden and watched Jessie's 4th birthday party unfold in front of her. The garden was transformed, blue and gold balloons everywhere, a massive bouncy castle, tables laden with food that a catering company had prepared. 20 children from Jessie's preschool ran shrieking through the grass, Jessie in the center of them, his laughter carrying across the lawn. He was healthy, thriving. His last cardiac checkup had shown his repaired valves functioning perfectly. He took daily medication, would need monitoring his whole life, but he was running and playing and living like any other 4-year-old. Looking at him now, full of joy and energy, it was hard to remember the tiny, gray baby fighting for every breath. Barbara wore a flowing yellow sundress, her hair down around her shoulders. No uniform, no cleaning supplies tucked in her pockets. Just a mother at her son's birthday party. Thomas appeared beside her, his hand finding hers naturally, their fingers interlacing. He wore jeans and a casual shirt, the billionaire who'd learned to be human, to be present, to choose his family over his empire. Happy? He asked softly. Barbara laughed, but it came out shaky. Terrified. Every day I'm terrified I'll wake up and this won't be real. That I'll still be in that little room next to the nursery, and Jessie will still be dying. And this, she gestured at the party, at their joined hands, at everything will have just been a dream. Thomas turned to face her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. It's real. You made it real, Barbara. You chose us when you had every reason to walk away. When anyone else would have said not my problem and walked out that door. I couldn't leave him. I know. And that's why you're his mother. That's why Thomas paused, something shifting in his expression. That's why I love you. Not because you saved Jesse. Because you showed me what it means to love someone so completely that your own safety, your own comfort, your own life becomes secondary to theirs. Barbara's eyes filled with tears. They'd said I love you before, but something about this moment, Jesse's laughter in the background, the sun warm on her face, Thomas looking at her like she hung the moon, made it feel new. Mama, Mama, Jesse's voice cut through the moment. He was running toward them, his face flushed with happiness, two other children trailing behind him. Come play. We're playing superheroes, and I'm the fast one. Barbara knelt down as Jesse crashed into her, his small arms wrapping around her neck. You wanted to be a superhero too. You're already a superhero, Jesse said seriously, his 4-year-old logic absolute. You're my mama. That's the best superhero. Barbara's throat closed up. Thomas crouched beside them, and Jesse immediately included him in the hug, one arm around each of them. And Daddy too. We're all superheroes. They stayed like that for a moment, the three of them tangled together, Jesse between them, a family portrait that defied every convention. Not blood, not biology, not what anyone had expected or predicted or thought possible, but real, built on sacrifice and choice and love that had refused to recognize boundaries. Barbara looked up at the mansion behind them, this enormous house that had once been just a workplace, where she'd been invisible, insignificant, just the help. Now it was home. Jesse's home. Their home. Filled not with the cold perfection Christine had maintained, but with toys scattered in corners, Jesse's artwork on the refrigerator, the warm chaos of actual life being lived. Come on. Jesse pulled away, grabbing both their hands. Come play. Barbara let herself be pulled to her feet, Thomas beside her, both of them allowing Jesse to drag them toward the bouncy castle. Other parents watched them, some with knowing smiles, some still adjusting to the unusual family dynamic. Barbara had stopped caring what people thought months ago. The tabloids had eventually moved on. Most people just saw what was obvious, a child who was loved, thriving, surrounded by people who'd chosen him. As they reached the bouncy castle, Jesse turned back one more time. I love you, Mama, he said simply, the way children do, with complete and uncomplicated truth. I love you, Daddy. We love you too, baby, Barbara said, her voice thick with emotion. Forever. Jesse beamed and ran to join his friends. Barbara and Thomas stood side by side, watching him play, their hands still joined. Around them, the party continued, music and laughter, children playing, the celebration of a life that had almost been lost. You know what I think about? Sometimes, Thomas said quietly. That night Christine left. What would have happened if you decided it wasn't your problem? If you'd just gone upstairs and let me figure it out? Barbara shuddered. He would have died. Yes. And I would have lost him without ever really knowing him. Without ever becoming his father. Without ever. Thomas turned to her. Without ever finding you. My whole life, I thought family was something you were born into. That love was something that happened to you, not something you chose. You taught me different. Barbara leaned her head against his shoulder, watched Jesse spin in circles until he fell down laughing. I didn't teach you anything. I couldn't walk away. Something in me knew that if I left him that night, I'd regret it every day for the rest of my life. Do you regret it now? Any of it? The courtroom, the media, everything you went through. Barbara thought about the headlines, the shame, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep terrified she'd lose Jesse. She thought about crossing lines she couldn't uncross, signing her name to documents she had no legal right to sign, loving a child who wasn't hers. Not for 1 second, she said. Thomas kissed her forehead. Good. Because Jesse and I are pretty attached to you now. You're stuck with us. Barbara smiled, real and genuine. I can think of worse fates. They stood together as the afternoon stretched toward evening, watching their son play, their family unconventional and hard-won and absolutely real surrounding them. Other families at the party saw a billionaire and his former employee, a scandal turned into something respectable through legal ruling and time. But Barbara knew the truth that mattered. Family wasn't about blood or money or what society expected. Family was who showed up in the darkest moments and refused to leave. Family was who loved when love cost everything. She'd been just the maid, invisible in rooms where power and wealth moved. She'd believed that her position, her race, her place in the world made her love less valuable than a biological parent's. She'd been wrong. Love had no hierarchy. Devotion recognized no boundaries. And the family they'd built, Thomas, Barbara, and Jesse, was proof that the most real families were the ones you chose, the ones you fought for, the ones you created through showing up every single day and choosing to stay. Jesse ran back to them one more time before the party ended, grass-stained and exhausted and radiantly happy. He grabbed both their hands and pulled them together. "Family hug," he demanded, and they obliged, the three of them wrapped around each other in the golden late afternoon light. Barbara closed her eyes, breathed in the moment, the weight of Jesse in her arms, Thomas's hands steady on her back, the sound of her son's heartbeat against her chest. That heart that had almost stopped so many times. That heart that now beat strong and steady, pumping life through a body that thrived. She'd saved his life. But the truth was, he'd saved hers too. Given her purpose, belonging, a family she'd never dared dream she deserved. "Mama," Jesse murmured against her neck. "Yes, baby. Can we do this every day? All of us together?" Barbara's eyes met Thomas's over Jesse's head. She saw her own emotion reflected, their gratitude, love, the overwhelming sense of having found something worth every sacrifice. "Yes," Barbara promised. "Every day? All of us together. Forever." And she meant it. This was her family. Not the family she'd been born into, but the one she'd chosen, the one she'd fought for, the one that had been built in the crucible of crisis and emerged stronger for it. She'd been just the maid, just the help, just the woman no one saw. She'd become so much more. She'd become exactly who she was always meant to be: Jesse's mother, Thomas's partner, and the heart of a family that proved love could transcend any boundary, any expectation, any rule about who deserved to be called family. They held each other as the sun set over the garden, three people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light. A family, the realest kind, the kind that mattered. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.